Today, we barely think about how global communications impact our lives. We are able to instantly call people, communicate with others, and access information and entertainment. This is all made possible with a network of highly complex and interconnected satellites that, with the help of other infrastructure, form our global communication system. Satellites were the catalyst to start the information age. The connection they provided allowed for instant access to news, entertainment, and communications across the world. First of the satellites in this network to go online was known as Telstar 1. Launched in 1962, Telstar 1 was the first active communication satellite, enabling global real-time transmissions during its operational lifespan. Telstar 1 was also the first privately sponsored space mission, built by Bell Telephone Laboratories for AT&T. Telstar 1 had an enormous positive social, civil, and technological impact upon the world. The connections it provided symbolized the beginnings of the information age. Its descendants provide us with instantaneous access to vast amounts of information, while they orbit the Earth doing the same job of Telstar, nearly 60 years later. Although Telstar was built more than 50 years ago, the idea of satellites and space travel is much older. In the 19th century, the idea of space travel with orbital satellites and rockets was written about in the 1865 book by Jules Verne titled From the Earth to the Moon. Years later, this book went on to inspire men such as Hermann Oberth and Konstantin E. Tsiolkovsky. These two men, along with Dr. Robert Goddard, are the fathers of rocketry for their research in the early 20th century on science, physics, and mathematics. German rockets became prevalent in World War II. The country invented the V-2, the answer to many modern rockets, such as the mighty Saturn V. The work of these German engineers, and many others, went on to inspire future scientists to invent more rockets and space technology. One of these future technologies was the first communications satellite, Telstar 1. Even before Jules Verne wrote about satellites, science fiction was already starting to introduce them to many, as the genre's authors speculated their possibility. The first of these stories was published in 1862 by the Atlantic Monthly, titled The Brick Moon. Written by Edward Everett Hale, the story depicts a satellite made of bricks. People sent out Morse code signals back to Earth by jumping up and down on the satellite's surface. Hale was not alone, though. Arthur C. Clarke, a 26-year-old science fiction writer and Royal Air Force officer, published a more realistic idea of communication satellites in a 1945 issue of Wireless World, called Extraterrestrial Relays. Can rocket stations give worldwide radio coverage? Clarke's satellite shows a satellite 22,236 miles above Earth, moving at the speed of our planet's rotation, remaining in that same fixed position at that altitude. The altitude suggested is now called geostationary orbit, ideal for communication satellites in the modern world. As more ideas of orbital satellites were proposed, a catalyst occurred that sped up the development of satellites. The Cold War was fought after World War II between the US and the USSR. The biggest threats the countries had were nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, invented by the Nazi Germans in 1944. Because of ICBMs, space superiority became a vital priority for the US and USSR. As satellites could be launched into orbit alongside rockets, they followed as the next step in this technological development contest, the aptly named space race. The war wasn't with an army in battle, it was fought with technological advancements. The ability for missiles and satellites to achieve orbit and later to land on the moon was seen as symbolism for the strength of national security and military technology. One of the most notable of these satellites was Echo, launched in 1960. Echo was the first communications satellite. It was a large reflective metal balloon, a passive transmitter. Echo served as a primitive example of what satellites could achieve. But in 1962, Telstar 1 changed everything. More technologically advanced than Echo, Telstar 1 not only transmitted and received message, but amplified them as well. On July 23rd, 1962, 13 days after the launch, the satellite relayed a public broadcast of a speech by President John F. Kennedy.
I understand that part of today's press conference is being relayed by the Telstar communications satellite to viewers across the Atlantic. And this is another indication of the extraordinary world in which we live. This satellite must be high enough to carry messages from both sides of the world, which is, of course, a very essential requirement for peace. And I think this understanding, which will inevitably come from the speedier communications, is bound to increase the well-being and security of all people here and those across the ocean. So we're glad to participate in this operation developed by private industry, launched by government in admirable cooperation.
In the speech, Kennedy acknowledged Telstar's impact and the ushering in of a new age of technology and the proliferation of accessible information. Telstar 1 was used for communications between the US and Europe and transmitted over 400 signals, telecommunications, and messages. However, Telstar 1 had a short lifespan. A nuclear explosion, Starfish Prime, was detonated by the US military the day before the satellite launch, unintentionally radiating Telstar 1 and slowly destroying it until it stopped working on February 21st, 1963. However, not only did Telstar provide the world with a stable source of communication and news, but it paved the way for later satellites, serving a clear message to people that satellites could change their lives. It was not only the satellites themselves that were beginning to change. Many things we take for granted today are the direct result of satellites, such as the internet, GPS, and accurate weather forecasts. In other words, Telstar 1 served as a pioneer for many critical modern-day technologies. Not everyone in the US was happy about the launch of Telstar 1. Many were worried that AT&T, the company who funded and built the satellite, would soon have a monopoly on not only the telephone business, but also the space business. In response to these concerns, President Kennedy approved the Communications and Satellite Act, which created a federally supervised company called the Communications Satellite Corporation, or ComSat, which includes several US companies and even AT&T. ComSat ensured that AT&T could not have a monopoly in space. Soon after ComSat was formed, it went on to be one of the founding members of Intelsat, which was created to manage international satellite communications. Over time, ComSat has evolved, and although it may look a little different, ComSat still exists today. Because of Telstar, a whole new wave of surveillance laws issued by the government have been made, prompting controversies relating to the violation of privacy on the internet, a technology reliant on the continual use of satellites. Keyhole satellites used for the collection of military intelligence also collect ordinary data concerning the lives of the public, when they leave for work, who they meet, etc., which directly brings up the question of legality. Does this violate the Fourth Amendment, which protects people's privacy? Satellites bring a lot of good to the world, but as their photographic imagery increases in power, it raises questions. Will the amenities satellites provide ever be overshadowed by the growing surveillance issues? However, the most long-lasting impact of Telstar 1 is the start of the information age. Before the launch of Telstar 1, the transmitting of live television across the Atlantic Ocean was unheard of. But now, people began to realize how places thousands of miles apart could be connected in seconds, not weeks.
Telstar's first successful broadcast triggered technologies and events that continue to make the world a smaller place.
Telstar 1 was followed by more satellites and other game-changing technologies such as the internet and personal computers. The connections that Telstar and later satellites created allow for leaders of foreign countries to communicate to smooth tensions, allow people and workers in remote places to get help if needed, for military intelligence to operate more smoothly, and in general, all the communications occurring in people's everyday lives to take place much faster and easier. Telstar 1 became the catalyst that started the rapid sharing of information that defines the information age. The development, creation, and eventual launch of Telstar 1 was done not only with the aid from NASA, Bell Labs, and AT&T, but with centuries of papers and research. During the 20th century, research accelerated when scientists, theorists, and writers from many countries worked to develop these technologies, such as Telstar 1. After the launch of Telstar 1, the continuation of new ideas and creations did not stop. With the communication that satellites such as Telstar 1 provided, and the explosion of instantly available information, news, and entertainment it kickstarted, satellite technology has continued to advance forward. Telstar 1 truly stands as one of the greatest landmarks in civil history, changing the world forever and bringing the world together, no matter how far away.